Hey everyone, my name is Kevin Grote, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Super Trains.
Roll the rails and save the day. Roll the rails and save the day. The super trains are on the way. The super trains are on the way.
Published by Treasure Falls Games, Super Trains is a semi-cooperative game for 2 to 5 players. In Super Trains, each player plays as a, you guessed it, superpowered train. During the course of the game, players will deliver both passengers and cargo to locations on the map, upgrade their super trains, complete missions, and work together to solve emergencies caused by the evil semi-truck Rollar. The game ends once Rollar has been defeated and all his emergencies throughout Gearland have been solved. The player who collected the most stars during the course of the game is the winner. So, let's set up the game and learn to play. First, each player will select a super train and take the matching train miniature, train board, star caboose, and super gears. Keep in mind that the star caboose only comes in the deluxe edition. Place your super gears near your train board and, if you're using the deluxe edition, add the star caboose to the end of your train board. Next, place the board in the center of the table. Now, create the emergency deck, which will be made up of these green, gray, and red emergency cards. This emergency deck will have red cards on the bottom, gray cards in the middle, and green cards on top. The number of each colored emergency card will depend on the number of players. For a 2 or 3 player game, use 3 red cards, 6 gray cards, and 6 green cards. For a 4 or 5 player game, use all 4 of the red cards, 8 gray cards, and 8 green cards. Shuffle the red cards and deal out the required number of cards onto the center of the board. Now, do the same thing with the gray cards, placing them on top of the red cards, and once again with the green cards being placed on top of gray. Place any unused cards back in the box. You won't use them for this game. Now, place the orange Rollar miniature on top of the emergency deck. Keep in mind that this is the deluxe edition of Super Trains, so if you've got the standard edition, Rollar will be a standee. Shuffle the kind train cards and place them on their designated spot on the board. Now create the train depot by shuffling the deck of passenger cards and the deck of cargo cards separately, and place each deck onto its spot on the board. Now deal 3 face-up passenger cards and 3 face-up cargo cards next to the respective decks. Each player should draw 1 passenger card and 1 cargo card and place them onto their train board. Now each player draws 3 mission cards, 1 of each color, and places them next to their train board. All players now place their super train miniature onto the location on the board that matches their color. Create piles near the board of all the gears and gear generators, as well as a pile for your damage tokens. Finally, place the 3 dice near the board. The player who most recently rode on a train goes first. Now that the game is set up, let's learn how to play. Each turn begins with the dice phase. Simply roll all 3 dice at once. First, look at the gear die to see which type of gear will be generated. In this case, it's a yellow gear. Now, all players with a yellow gear generator will generate a yellow gear, taking 1 gear from the supply and placing it onto their train board. When a gear is generated, the gear must be placed on a gear generator of the matching color. Players may also place gears onto a wild gear generator, which can hold any colored gear. However, this ability may only be used by the active player who just rolled the dice. In other words, if you're not the active player, you may not place gears onto wild gear generators. There is also a bonus for the active player who just rolled the dice. That player is allowed to generate up to 3 gears matching the color of the die roll, which is still yellow for us. However, in order to generate additional gears, the active player must have open gear generators, and those gear generators must be connected to one another. So in this example, the active player would only be able to generate 1 gear, placing it on any one of these 3 generators. In this example, the active player would be able to generate and place 2 yellow gears onto these 2 generators, because they're connected. And in this example, the active player would be able to gain a maximum of 3 yellow gears, placing them on these 3 gear generators. But keep in mind that even though these gear generators are connected to a wild generator, you may not place one of these gears onto the wild space. So, in this example, the active player would only be allowed to generate 2 yellow gears. Because of this placement bonus, it's wise for players to place gear generators next to other gear generators of the same color. Also, if the die roll shows the wild gear, then the active player chooses a gear type, and then all players generate gears of that chosen color. Once all players have finished generating gears, the active player resolves the Rollar die. Looking at the Rollar die, it will show either the Rollar symbol or an arrow. If you roll a Rollar symbol, draw the top card of the emergency deck and without looking at it, place it face down on the location that was rolled on the location die. In this case, the location die shows the hospital, so we'll place this card onto the hospital. This card represents an emergency that the players must solve. If the location already has an emergency, slide the new emergency underneath the pre-existing one. If one of the super trains is currently on the location, then the emergency must be revealed immediately and resolved. However, we'll get into that in just a few minutes. If the Rollar die does not show the Rollar symbol, but instead shows an arrow, then Rollar will move this turn instead of forcing you to draw a new emergency card from the deck. When an arrow is rolled, you can ignore the result rolled on the location die. Keep in mind that the white line represents the bottom side of the die, so this side means the Rollar miniature will move up one space on the board, and this side means the Rollar miniature will move to the right one space on the board. Rollar will always move up or right, never down or left. However, if the Rollar miniature is ever on the edge of the map, when it needs to move, it will move to the opposite side of the board. So in this case, it would move from this space all the way to this space over here. Super trains cannot travel through a space that Rollar occupies. Also, if Rollar moves onto the same space as a super train, that player must take a damage token. A damage token is worth -1 star at the end of the game, and remember, these stars are how you win, so you want to avoid damage tokens if you can. If Rollar occupies one of the 6 locations on the board, players may not drop off cargo or passengers at that location, nor may they solve emergencies there. Now, one thing to note is that in a 2 or 3 player game, you will not roll the Rollar die or the location die for the first 3 rounds of the game. For a 4 or 5 player game, you won't roll these dice for the first 2 rounds of the game. This gives players a chance to drop off some cargo or passengers, add some gear generators to their train boards, or maybe even upgrade their trains before Rollar starts wreaking havoc all over the place. Once the dice have all been resolved, we move into the super train phase. This is when players spring into action to help save Gearland. During a player's turn, they may move up to 5 spaces and take any or all of the 5 different actions as many times as they want. Those 5 actions are drop off robot passengers, deliver cargo, solve emergencies, use a super gear, or use a kind train card. Let's talk about moving your super train. The first thing to note is that super trains move differently than Rollar. Rollar moves from space to space, ignoring the directions of the train tracks. He is a truck after all. Super trains, however, must move along the tracks on the board. They can never jump to a different track unless they have a special power that allows them to do so. Each turn, a super train may move up to 5 spaces along the tracks. Super trains are allowed to stop in a space while moving, complete an action, for example, dropping off a passenger, and then continue moving. At the start of a player's turn, they may choose a direction and move their super train along the tracks, and you don't have to continue moving in the same direction as you were on a previous turn, but you are not allowed to turn your train around in the middle of your turn and go backwards. Super trains are allowed to move through a space with another super train, and they can also end their turn on the same space as another super train. Spaces with an unresolved emergency card or spaces occupied by the Rollar miniature are blocked, and super trains may not move through them. Lastly, a player may spend a green gear at any time during their turn to move up to 2 additional spaces, and there's no limit to the number of green gears that can be used this way during a player's turn. Now, I've mentioned them already, but the map of Gearland has 6 special locations: the hospital, the construction site, the police headquarters, downtown, the school, and the carnival. At these locations, you can drop off robot passengers, deliver cargo, and solve emergencies. Each player will have on their train board at least 1 passenger card and 1 cargo card. Both of these show their rewards in the bottom right corner. In order to drop off your passenger, simply visit the location shown on the passenger card. Move the passenger card from your train board to your star caboose. Keep in mind that if you're playing with the standard edition, instead of placing things onto your star caboose, you'll simply make a pile next to your train board. If the passenger card shows a gear generator on it, take the matching generator from the supply and add it wherever you'd like to your train board. If you'd like to replace one of your pre-existing gear generators, you may do so, but you may not cover up a wild gear generator. Similar to your passengers, you can also deliver cargo to locations on the board. Cargo, however, requires gears. Simply move to the location shown on the cargo card and remove the matching gear from your train board, returning it to the supply. Move the cargo card to your star caboose. If your card showed gear generators as the reward, take the matching gear generators from the supply and add them to your train board. Keep in mind that you may not drop off passengers or deliver cargo to a location that is blocked by an emergency card or by the Rollar miniature. Also, you're not allowed to drop off passengers or deliver cargo to a location if you are starting your turn in that location. Another thing you may do at a location is solve an emergency. Remember, locations are blocked by emergency cards, so instead of entering the location, you'll first move to an adjacent location. Diagonal spaces are not considered adjacent. First, reveal the emergency card by flipping it face up. Now we can see what type of gears will be needed to solve the emergency, as well as the type of reward it offers. If the player has the required gears on their train board, they will discard the gears, returning them to the supply, and place the emergency card on their star caboose. Congratulations, you've solved the emergency. If the emergency earns you a gear generator, add the matching generator to your train board immediately. Then, feel free to continue your turn if you still have movement remaining. However, if you do not have the required gears shown on the emergency card, you may ask your fellow super trains for help. Others may choose to help by offering one or more of the required gears from their train board. For each gear they give you, that player draws one kind train card. The option to help a train in need is given to players in reverse turn order, so counterclockwise. The first train can give one gear, and then it passes to the next player, who can give one gear. Continue in this way until you get back to the first player, who can then give a second gear, and so on. One final note on emergencies: green emergency cards are the easiest to solve, gray emergency cards are more difficult, and red emergency cards are the most challenging and are where you will finally battle Rollar. If the active player doesn't have the required gears to solve an emergency card and they cannot receive help from the other super trains, then that player takes damage. You cannot take any more actions this turn and your movement ends immediately. Proceed to the upgrade phase. Because the emergency was not solved, it stays on the board, but now it remains face up, meaning a super train on a future turn knows exactly what gears are needed in order to solve that emergency. Face-up emergencies still block the location and prevent super trains from dropping off passengers or delivering cargo. Also, when a super train visits a face-up emergency, they may not ask for help to solve that emergency. A super train does not need movement to solve an emergency, meaning if they run out of movement in a space adjacent to an emergency, they can still attempt to solve the emergency like normal. They just cannot move into that location if the emergency is solved. Another action a super train may take on their turn is to use a super gear. Super gears are special gears that you'll add to your train board. Super gears provide special powers, or stars, at the end of the game. If you have a super gear on your train board that provides a special power, you may use that special power on your turn. The last action a super train may take on their turn is to use a kind train card. The only way to gain one of these is by giving gears to other players when they're attempting to resolve an emergency that they just revealed. Kind train cards are always good and provide special powers, benefits, and sometimes stars. Some kind train cards can be resolved immediately and then added to their star caboose, like these two cards here, while others can be kept near the player's train board and used on their turn, like this one that lets a player move their train 5 additional spaces when used. Once a super train has finished doing all that they can or want to do, they move into the upgrade phase. During the upgrade phase, you may discard gears in order to upgrade your train board with super gears. There's no limit to the number of super gears you can purchase on your turn, as long as you have the required gears to pay for them all. Each player has their own set of super gears that only they may acquire. Each super gear shows its upgrade cost on one side and its power on the other side. All train boards have one dedicated spot at the top for a super gear, although Millie the tech train board has 2. Additional super gears can be added to a train board by covering up open spaces or by removing gear generators in order to make room for the super gear. If you're making room for a super gear and remove a gear generator that has a gear already on it, feel free to move that gear to an available gear generator of the matching color. Also, it should be noted that you cannot cover a wild gear generator with a super gear. I also want to mention Sunny and Deacon, who each have large super gears that when placed on their train boards allow them to add an additional passenger or cargo card to their train board. These super gears take up 4 spaces on their train board. It is possible to use the designated super gear spot at the top of the board with the 2 spaces directly below for one of these large super gears. Once a player has finished their upgrade phase, if they completed any jobs on their turn, they now draw new passenger cards and/or cargo cards, filling any empty slots on their board. When doing so, whether drawing a new passenger card or cargo card, you may choose from the 3 available cards or blindly draw a random card from the top of the corresponding deck. Now, refill the train depot by filling any empty slots with cards from their deck. This ends a player's turn. Pass the dice to the player to your left. The game continues like this until the game is over. The game enters the final phase once the final emergency card is placed on a location. Every player gets 2 more turns, including the player who just placed the final emergency card. Even though there are no more emergency cards in the center of the board, players will still roll the Rollar die to see if Rollar will move during their turn. If the Super Trains manage to solve every single emergency, remove the Rollar miniature from the board, but continue playing until all players have had their final 2 turns. These final 2 turns are your last chance to earn as many stars as possible. Once the final turn is complete, whether Rollar was defeated or not, the game ends. Players count up their stars from the following sources: passengers, cargo, emergencies, kind train cards, missions, super gear powers, and train board bonuses. Mission cards are dealt out at the beginning of the game, 3 to each player, and give players additional goals during the course of the game. Mission cards are pretty straightforward. Once you have met a mission card's requirements, you'll move that card to your star caboose and score those stars at the end of the game. Incomplete missions do not hurt your star score at the end. After completing a mission, you do not draw a new mission card. In order to stay organized, it's a good idea to set aside completed cargo or passenger cards that count towards a mission in a separate pile. Then, when the mission is complete, make sure to move the mission and all the cards in that pile to your star caboose. Some super gears provide stars at the end of the game. Some provide 1 star for each gear generator of a certain color, while this super gear provides Millie with 3 stars if she has at least 1 of each gear generator. There are 2 train board bonuses awarded to players at the end of the game. The first is the longest connector chain. The super train that has the highest number of same color gear generators connected together earns 4 stars. So in this example, Deacon has 5 blue gear generators, although only 4 of them are connected. Sunny has 4 connected yellow gear generators, and Millie has 5 connected green gear generators, so Millie would earn the 4 stars. However, if Millie had not played this game, then Deacon and Sunny would be tied. In the case of a tie, all tied players earn 2 stars. The second train board bonus is for a full train. Every player that manages to fill every empty spot of their board with a gear generator or super gear earns 3 stars. After totaling up stars, the player with the most stars is the winner. And that's how to play Super Trains. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to ask any questions down in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them right away. Now get out of here. You've got some emergencies to solve.
The super trains are on the way.